everyone. I'm Jordan Curtis, a librarian at the Augusta-Richmond County Public Library System in Augusta, Georgia. Thank you so much for joining us for our program, NaNoWriMo Tips for Writing a Memoir, with our special guest, Ms. Nita Wiggins, as we celebrate National Novel Writing Month. Ms. Wiggins is a TV broadcaster turned professor and the author of her riveting memoir, Civil Rights Baby, My Story of Race, Sports, and Breaking Barriers in American Journalism. She is a Macon, Georgia native, a former resident of Augusta, Georgia, and a member of the Authors Club of Augusta. She currently resides in Paris, France. Today, Ms. Wiggins will discuss her memoir, as well as give guidance for writing our own. We are delighted and honored to have her with us. Ms. Wiggins, thank you for joining us and for being willing to share with us today.
I'm happy to be a part of a program involving the Augusta-Richmond County Public Library because it is the library system that supported me as a young person. So Jordan and Curtis, thank you for reaching across the Atlantic to Paris, France, where I find myself tonight.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay. And for everyone who's with us tonight, I'm happy to know that writing is important enough for you to make an investment of your time. And so I want to offer something that might be useful in your project. I know sometimes a writer has an idea and it remains an idea. And so I salute everyone who decided to take a step and maybe move forward in what you're doing. So just briefly about Paris, I am in the 13th arrondissement, for those of you who know the city. So it's the southeastern quadrant. When I was living in Augusta with my family, we lived in West Augusta. And again, the library was a part of how we were educated and how we expanded our horizons. So let's get going. So I'm going to share with you the worst day of my childhood. And it's not as though this is a pleasant endeavor for me. In fact, I put myself out there and I discuss this in order to be helpful to people, especially someone who might be looking for a way forward at a challenging time. But also there are lessons for writers in what I plan to share. And I have been told that my father, Mr. Roosevelt Wiggins, is present at the library. And so he is a part of this first story that I'm going to tell. So hi, Dad, and thank you for supporting me with this, the way that you always have supported me. So I lived with my parents and my siblings in Montclair and attended Warren Road Elementary School, Tut Junior High, and then Westside High School. But let's go back to the beginning of my education. I knew when I was 8 years old that I wanted to be a journalist and specifically covering the Dallas Cowboys. I was so serious about this that I was already in training to be a journalist. 3.5 hours of homework I would do before dinner, and then 3.5 hours of homework after dinner. And that is simply because I knew a journalist had to be prepared. A journalist could not be of average dedication, average motivation, average preparation. And so that's who I was as a little girl at Warren Road Elementary School. What I was studying, I loved social studies, and I loved the courses that included writing. I loved English. And so let me add at this point that as I was working so hard to be that future journalist, I had classmates around me who were my friends. But for a number of years at my elementary school, I was one of only 2 Black kids at the school. Now, for me, it didn't present an issue because the friends were always great to me. The school the students were always great to me. They were my friends. But this brings me to the worst day of my adolescence. And it happened in music class at the school where I had all those great friends. The worst day occurred when the music teacher, the white music teacher, came to our school. And as usual, she started her music lesson and she said, "Okay, everyone open your music books to a certain page." When I opened my music book to that page, I saw the words Negro spiritual at the top. And it caused an instant problem with my being the only Black kid in the class. I looked at those terrifying words for me, Negro spiritual, and it got worse. The teacher said to the 15 or so white kids in the room and to me, "Nita's going to show us how it's done." You can imagine my shock. Those awful words just were not what I wanted to hear. The eyes of the kids landed on me. Okay. The eyes of my classmates landed on me as if everyone was waiting for me to sing, to show them how to sing a Negro spiritual. They were my friends, and so they always knew that I had the answer when called on in class. And so they waited for me to perform that song. But I had no skill in performing a Negro spiritual. What happened to me as I sat there, I felt small, I felt ashamed, and I felt inadequate. And as a kid who knew she was going to be a journalist, those were not the emotions I wanted to have in a public setting. So as I closed my eyes, just wishing for something other than the situation I was in, waiting to vaporize, waiting to disappear. But I opened my eyes and looked at the teacher, and my day got worse because she said, "Come on." And I read her face. Her lips were curled into a smile, but her eyes were not smiling. And there I was, disarmed and feeling inadequate. I sat so long that the teacher finally leaned over from her chair, and put the needle of the record player on the vinyl disc back in the day, and the music started playing. My classmates started singing, and I sat there still in a state of trauma because of what I was asked to do, that I was inadequate to do. And as I'm listening to the music, I'm trying to catch on to the rhythm. I'm struggling and I can't. I'm trying to read the words on the page of the music book so that I can sing along, but I can't because my eyes were filled with tears. And that story really does bring to light the worst day of my adolescence. So let me ask you your thoughts. If that were your story, would you have included that in your memoir? Anyone have an answer? Anybody? And I know that people will watch this recording later on. So as you watch this in real time later on, really take a moment to reflect if that is a story that you would have included. Well, I did not include that story in my memoir, at least not in the earliest version. And that is simply because I had forgotten. For 40 years, the most terrible day of my adolescence was absolutely forgotten. But it's an important story, in my view. It is an important story in writing one's memoir, because a memoir will show the high moments and the challenging moments in a life. Because in that way, a memoir can possibly be instructive for the readers. So how did I come back to that memory of that terrible day? Well, this is the advice, the first piece of advice I want to make sure to share with those of you who are writing. When you are creating the narrative of the story, recreating the narrative of your life, the highs and the lows have to make sense to the reader. I did not know this. I truly did not know until I handed an early manuscript to an experienced award-winning author named Nita Wiggins. I selected her to be my counselor to help me bring out the best stories of the life I have lived. And by best, I mean the stories that are most engaging to readers. So with Nita Wiggins, she said, yes, Nita, I want to work with you on your manuscript. And here is something I need you to do. She said, Nita, you've got to find, remember, uncover in the dark recesses of your life history, uncover something in your life that helps readers understand why you became someone who disregards the rules that people put on you. She said that you've got to find something in your life history to write about that helps people understand how you built a shield, especially because you would need a shield in your later life. And so this is absolutely crucial for, I think, for the successful sharing of one story. Find those threads of early episodes, of early struggles that taught you a lesson, That's because someone who's reading your book might be reading it to break out of some restriction or some barrier. So let's do that, okay? Tip number 1. So during our time together, let me tell you what my plan is. I've already explained how I remembered that painful story. But what we will do next is that we will work on organizing the painful stories and the successful stories, the rewarding events of your life. And I also want to share with you how I was able to write some detailed scenes. People who read my book often say to me that, wow, you wrote with such detail. How did you remember everything? Like, especially when I met Mrs. Rosa Parks and when she and I had a private hug before the interview, I especially want to share how I recreated those scenes so that other people could experience them. And so that does bring me to another tip, that when we are writing and describing and trying to take people from the public into our memories or into different occurrences in our lives, we have to touch their senses with the words we choose. So the sensation of touch, the sensation of sound, the feelings, if there is cold air blowing on your skin, that is part of the detailed writing that you must do. So we'll talk about how to do that. And we will have, of course, 2 writing sprints. And that's part of why NaNoWriMo is very useful for writers, because this time together, we will have a dedicated carve out of time to focus on what you are writing. Okay? So those of you who are writing, is everyone writing a memoir, or are there other genres that you are writing? Because we can discuss fiction writing as well as nonfiction, but what I specialize in is memoir writing. So this brings me to my third tip. When writing, it's important to be a reader as well. And Marita Golden recommended a specific book that I should read. It was by, it's called All Over But the Shoutin', Tin, apostrophe. And so she told me that was an interesting memoir for me to read because of the subject matter, a book written by another journalist. And I've spent my professional career as a journalist. But in all, I read 12 to 15 memoirs, autobiographies, and biographies. And I want to just talk about a few of those. So here's one. If you saw the movie Just Mercy, this is the story of Brian Stevenson. Okay, it's his memoir. This is one that I read. And another one that helped me in deciding how personal to be in telling my story. This book, My Song by Harry Belafonte. And I had the pleasure of meeting him sometime after I read this. I also read a book by Charlene Hunter Galt. Those of you in Georgia know Miss Hunter Galt because she comes from our state and was instrumental in revolutionizing education at the university level in Georgia. I also read David Axelrod's book called Believer. And gosh, there's such a long list of them. I read, Jennifer Lewis's book. I read Alice Dunnigan's book. In fact, I dedicated my book to Alice Dunnigan, an early journalist covering the United States president in the 1940s, an African-American woman. So I dedicated my book to Mrs. Dunnigan and to my family members. So let's talk about this first writing sprint. It's time for you, whether you're using your keyboard or your note paper and a pen to do your writing. I do want to get started with your, to warm up your writing muscles. Okay? So let's do this. Let's do 10 minutes of writing. This is a good way to organize your story, especially if it's a nonfiction, if it's your memoir. And even if it's not nonfiction, this would be useful, okay? Nonfiction writers, memoir writers. We will do a 10-minute writing sprint. Let me first explain what I think would be a useful drill for you. And that simply is to list the episodes in your life that scarred you in a way, that affected you in a way, or maybe even affected you in a positive way. And we will, what I'm asking for you to write is between 7 and 10 episodes in your life. Now, I don't mean winning an award. That's not what I'm talking about. For example, for me, having a day that I was singled out in front of an all-white group of people traumatized me to the point that I buried it for 40 years. I hope that you haven't had something as traumatic that you would want to forget it for 40 years. But in writing a memoir, this is where the important writing comes from. Episodes that affect us in a deep way are the episodes that other people need to know about. That makes the writing richer. If in writing your memoir, it is a list of accomplishments and the streets are always paved with gold, a reader might say, oh, that's great for you. That's great for you. But so what for me? Readers are often looking for your wisdom in what you write so that they can go forward and benefit from that. Okay? So let's do this. Let's take 10 minutes. I will set a timer. Okay? So those of you who are planning to write, I hope that you have, say, your beverage. I'm drinking a nice calming tea. But whatever beverage you need, I hope you're in a comfortable place. And we will give 10 minutes on the timer. So if you are standing by, getting ready to write, I'll get it there. And I'm kicking it off now, 10 minutes. Okay. So let's start. Feel free to move around, do what you might need to do, but let's do 10 minutes. And you are listing episodes in your life that have affected you in a deep way. Some positive, great, and sometimes not positive or challenging. Okay, so we'll be back together in 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so I'll show you. We have arrived at our 10 minutes. So let's put that on pause. Tell me, how did it go? Anyone want to share how that was, listing the episodes in your life that have shaped your personality or shaped your way of living? Anybody want to type? Or I see we have Ms. Holloman. Would you like to share? Well, you're currently muted. Okay. And I think you're saying, no, you don't want to share. Well, would you give me a thumbs up if this was useful? Starting to, thank you for the thumbs up. So the question that I always ask people, do you understand why I asked for this list of episodes in your life? Well, it is simply that this is starting to create the outline for your book. It's the outline, because when we have our life experiences, we have to start organizing somehow. And for me, this is a very good skeleton of events in a life. So one of the things that also I did is, and I want to share with you how it might be useful, is that even though you have the chronology of these episodes, the writing of your book, you need to shake it up a little bit, where you don't start out saying that you were born, or you start out talking about your childhood. Particularly the book by Harry Belafonte, he talks about being in a car with, and the Ku Klux Klan was chasing him, and he and Sidney Poitier were delivering their money that they had collected. They were delivering this to civil rights workers in Mississippi. So it is my advice, and it's what I have seen in the books that I read in my preparation. You create the chronology of those episodes, but then you shake up the book by writing about something that might be unexpected. In My Story by Rosa Parks, she doesn't start out with her childhood. She starts out with, one evening in early December 1955, I was sitting in the front seat of the colored section of a bus. So she jumps to the action. Your reading audience needs that. Another book that I read in the preparation of my book is by Malala. And you might know that she's the girl who, as a schoolgirl, was shot in the head by members of the Taliban. And she eventually, 2 to 3 years later, she was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And so her book is in the adult version and the adolescent version. And I selected the adolescent version because I do use this in my classes here in France. And the level of the communication is better for people who don't speak English as their first language. Just two more. I want to show two other examples. So My Life, My Love, My Legacy, this wonderful book by Coretta Scott King. It's one of them that I also read leading up to writing my book. And I like the way that she starts the book. So she starts on Thanksgiving night, 1942, when I was 15 years old. White racists burned our house to the ground. It was the home I was born in. This is probably an unknown episode in the life of Mrs. King, and it's definitely a way for people to be pulled through the narration of her story. It's the same for you. I like to say that imagine the reader is looking through a window and your life is on display through that window. That is the beauty of writing a story. You create the scene, you present the scene, and in the book, you need to make the right choice of something that will keep people engaged from the first page that they read to the end of the book. And here is one more book I'll show you. I loved this book, Angela Byrne. She is an Irish woman, and I have just communicated with her this week, and I'm hopeful of an interview. The book is called Not Forgotten, and she writes about 5 generations of her family in Ireland. And so she gives insight into the way people lived in her country and specifically in her family. And again, when I read this book, I felt as though I were observing through the window the nonfiction, so the true story of this family. And I think it's beautiful memoir writing when we can experience it in that way. So that's another tip that I want to make sure that you put on your list, that you want to show something people don't know about you or about your community, your situation. Make sure it's something that opens the door on something fresh and different. Along with that, one thing that Angela Byrne does is that because she talks about grandparents, her parents, she talks about her coupledom, her intimate relationship, she had to draw limits. And each of us has to do that when we are writing about our lives, because we will want to share a certain level of information, but there's usually someone else involved. And so by reading a number of memoirs and biographies and autobiographies, I was able to determine what are the limits I want to make, the line I want to draw when it comes to how much of my life in telling my story is telling someone else's life. So that's another important part. So make sure people see in through a window, but make sure that you are not revealing something that someone else does not want revealed until that person writes his or her own book. Okay. And okay. So let me move forward a little bit. I showed you a number of books, and I talked about setting some barriers. So yes, we do have to hold something for ourselves, for our private lives. But again, showing vulnerability of your own vulnerability, not necessarily exposing other people's, but when you show your vulnerability, your book can become a guide, something helpful for other people as they are making some decisions, or as they need to make decisions, or as they need to consider what type of life they want to have, what type of person they want to be. So when you are courageous in writing your book, these are the types of things that you might share that other people can benefit from. So of course you determine the limits of your life that you want to keep for yourself. So here's the other point that's really important. I feel that a writer needs to select an ideal reader. And by that, I mean the person who's waiting for your book. Who is that person who needs to know what you want to say? Who's waiting for the wisdom of your lived experience? And so for me, my ideal reader, I put her in my book. And she is on page 3 of Civil Rights Baby. Her name is Marley Diaz. And one day I would love to meet her. She is almost 20 years old at this point. But when I first heard about Marley Diaz, she was an 11-year-old girl, and yes, an African-American girl living in New Jersey. And she was on the news in her town because she told her teacher, or maybe others at her school, that she wanted to read books in class that were not just about white boys and their dogs. And she became a news story. And so when I heard her explain why she wanted different books, I said, that's the book I'm writing. And so I'll just read page 3, just a quick bit that I wrote to young Ms. Diaz. These are my words. I want to expose the detrimental effects that my career in television exacted on me. I want workplace discrimination and mistreatment to stop for people in all traditionally marginalized communities. I mean specifically mistreatment based on, quote, race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, unquote. The words engraved into American law. This is why I write. I write, too, in the hopes that young Marley Diaz and her generation can add my name to a group that is distressingly small, Black female protagonists for whom readers can root. Impassioned by books, the 11-year-old African-American girl in New Jersey pleaded for school reading assignments that did not focus only on, quote, white boys and their dogs, unquote. I agree with Marley. Okay? So decide who is that person. You might have to create the profile of that person, or there might be someone in your life. There might be someone you are yet to meet, but the ideal reader is a key part of writing a memoir that draws a person through page after page after page. That said, let me say that I am most pleased that a reader named Terry told me that she read Civil Rights Baby in 2 days. And she said she could not stop reading because the protagonist, Nita, in the book, is facing one situation after another, and what in her background has prepared her to handle that, and what is her deepest desire, what are her motivations that she carries with her to not make the misstep and lead to a mistake. That is the beauty of the ideal reader. When we as writers create a narrative that is going to be useful to people, they will read and read and read. Okay? So let me move to the next point. So I said the ideal reader, we're looking through a window. We're making sure that chapter 1 is something that shakes people up. For me, I'll just explain, since I know that there's a special Mr. Roosevelt Wiggins in Augusta, Georgia, who's listening. I will say that my father is in chapter 1 of my book. And what I create, the imagery that I share in the book regarding my family, and specifically the closeness that I have with my father, is that wherever he was, I wanted to be. And my pursuit of my journalism career in sports does have roots in my father's actions. But what I create in chapter 1 is the obstacle. I explain the obstacle that a girl in the 1970s in the United States did not have the opportunity to do everything she wanted in sports because of gender-based rules. And by writing that in the book, I expose people to the fact that looking through the window, this girl is in pursuit of what she wants, and the rules that don't make sense to her are not her rules. That is something useful to the ideal reader, and it is something that was useful to Terry, a grown woman, who said that the battles and the obstacles and the preparation and the motivation woven through the episodes in the memoir led her to read the book in 2 days. So keep that in mind as well. So let's do another timed writing sprint. But before I give my suggestion for the topic, I want you to pause and think without writing anything. But I want you to do the internal work for 2 minutes on the question I'm going to ask. The question is, if you do not write what you want to write, what will the world miss? Okay, you don't have to write this, but let's take 2 minutes, close your eyes and focus if you want to do it that way. But really, ask yourself and go as deeply as you can. If you do not write what you want to write, what will the world miss? And so we'll talk again in 2 minutes. Okay, that is more than 2 minutes. That's 2 minutes, 23. So it was just your chance to go inside and start to access some deep thoughts. I found that, excuse me, when I was writing, I often would write after 11 p.m. and I would go till 2 or 3 in the morning. Once I went from 11 p.m. until about 6 a.m. And that is simply because I was really going deeply into some memories. And I wanted to write at a time when I did not expect to be interrupted by telephone calls or anybody else's needs. And so between 11 p.m. and early morning hours, I was able to do interior work. And I hope that you did that for yourselves just then. But now here is the question that I want to ask, and I will give you 4 minutes to come up with this answer. But first, let me explain that for the question, if you do not write what you want to write, what will the world miss? Well, here's my answer. My answer is, I write my truths about preparing myself, but being denied opportunities. And that feels wrong to me. I write so that readers will empathize with my situation, and so that I can instruct others like you to write stories that bring out empathy. So overall, I write stories so that I can help others write their stories to bring out empathy and to lead to better treatment of people. That is what the world would miss if I did not write. Okay? That is interior work. So here is your question. This is the last sprint that we will do during this NaNoWriMo 2022. So on your paper, again, we're going inside, 4 minutes. If you do not write, what will your ideal reader miss? The world will miss your contributions, but I want you to address your energy to your ideal reader. So if you do not write, what will your ideal reader miss? For me, what would Marley Diaz miss? Okay, so we'll come back together in about 4 minutes. Okay, that's great. We have done our 4 minutes. So I want you to think about that response. I hope that it was something that touched you, that went inside. I've heard so many successful people say that if what you are focusing on doesn't bring a tear to your eye, then maybe you're not so dedicated. Maybe you're not so focused on what you're doing. So I hope that some of you who are doing these writing sprints are really getting to the heart of your project, and it will pull you through. Because I have to say that, like with many other authors, I have read that people get toward the end of their project, their book, and they say, oh, forget it. I'm not doing it. People really start to doubt themselves toward the end of the process. They ask, well, who cares what I think? Who cares what I write? I know I was that person. I was one of them who said, oh, forget it. There's no reason to complete the project. But when you consider, if you do not write, what will your ideal reader miss? Maybe that sentiment can keep you on track when sometimes you feel that life would be so much simpler if you just stopped the project. I hope you continue, because I have to say that I love being an author. It's similar, yet it's different from the years that I was a journalist on television. Being an author, maybe it's a conversation for another time, but being an author has opened up many new avenues to meet people, many new conversations. I am asked quite often to comment on topics that are part of my life story. And that brings me to this. I have 102 footnotes related to civil rights, because I am of the civil rights generation in the United States, because I was born in 1964. And as I explain the emotional episodes in my life, and as I present them in my narrative, people who are from other countries, as my students are here in Europe, people from other countries don't have the context. And even people who do have the context may not have the knowledge that is included in these 102 footnotes. And I have 12 pages of end notes. So further amplification of significant historical facts or occurrences during my life. And that leads me to how I want to wrap up what we're doing in this year's NaNoWriMo. When I look at the question I get so often, well, tell me, how did you write such detail in your scenes? The detail comes from the research. Again, a memoir is nonfiction. So there is an historical record that is related to some parts of the story you are writing. So for me, when I met and interviewed Mrs. Rosa Parks in 1988, and when I asked her, could I give her a hug? And she replied, sure, baby, with her lovely Southern accent. That is an event that is, the report I was doing that day was to cover an historical event where her name, Mrs. Parks' name, was being revealed on a street sign. Fortunately, that day I was a television reporter, and in my TV report, there is video of Mrs. Parks, of course. And so as I recreated that scene with words only, I went back and I watched the video of the report so I could perfectly describe what she was wearing. I could perfectly describe the setting, the surroundings. And the way I wrote the story, people tell me that they have goosebumps from the sensations of my touch, my hug with Mrs. Parks, the way our hearts were beating beside each other because we were nearly the same height. When I described that she hugged me so forcefully that our cheeks touched, people tell me that they really have these sensations because of the details. Well, part of being able to share the details is that I had video proof that allowed me to describe the situation. So when you are retelling something that relates to factual events, use a photograph. Find photographs from the event so that you can really recreate the scene. Videos are great as well. Even play music that you would have heard that day or that maybe you did hear that day. And as I get close to the final 5 minutes, I do want to mention one of the things I am most proud of with the new edition of Civil Rights Baby is that I updated the book. The full title is Civil Rights Baby, My Story of Race, Sports, and Breaking Barriers in American Journalism. And so when there are occurrences in civil rights, it's important to have them updated in my book. And I mentioned end notes. In the end notes of the book, I have transcribed the congressional subcommittee hearing when 3 survivors of the Tulsa Greenwood race massacre went to or spoke before Congress. Two of the survivors were present in Washington, D.C. The third survivor was speaking to the committee via video conference, because of course this was during COVID in 2021. These survivors, now pay close attention, these survivors at the time that they spoke before Congress were 107 years old. That's Ms. Viola Fletcher, 107 years old, when she gave her testimony about surviving a race massacre. Hughes Van Ellis, 100 years old. They were both in Washington sharing their memories of the horror of that day. And Ms. Leslie Benningfield Randall, 106 years old. She spoke via video conference. But this goes back to the details of your memoir. People appreciate the facts. My readers have told me this. They appreciate being told what happened, how it happened, what are the details. And so there are 5 pages of testimony from Tulsa Greenwood survivors in Civil Rights Baby. That adds more detail, more context to the importance of the events that have happened during my lifetime. And those particular areas make the memoir, my memoir, and your memoir more grounded and more grounding for the people who might open the book looking for some solutions. I've enjoyed being able to spend some time with you, and I appreciate that you have invested time to advance your writing projects. And I wonder, would there be any questions from anyone who is involved in this video conference? And if you were to watch this video at another time, please reach out to me. I would be happy to answer questions. I can be reached at an email address that's very simple. It is Nita at Nita Wiggins. And so, of course, it's just my name is on the front of the book. So Nita at NitaWiggins.com. If you have writing questions, and anyone who is working on a book, I take these same training pearls and I offer them in what I call a quality quick start to write your book. And no matter at what phase you are in writing your book, I would love to know about your project, and we can look at how you move forward. So please reach out and ask any questions that you might have. So Augusta-Richmond County Public Library and Ms. Jordana Curtis, thank you for having me as a speaker, as a presenter during NaNoWriMo. And I want to thank everyone who has dropped in on this video conference. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them. Or other comments, questions or comments, please. Yes, I think we do have a person who has a question. Because I see that you are now unmuted, Ms. Holloman. Hi, nice to hear your voice. How can I help you? What
Very
comments?
interesting.
Okay, thank you.
It's very interesting. You know, I'm just amazed and was just listening. I really don't have any questions because I'm still trying to work on doing my family history. And
Yes.
I get to those brick walls. So I'm just stuck until I can find a way around it.
Okay. Well, when you have a brick wall, oh my goodness, what have you tried? And maybe I can offer some type of guidance. I had brick walls. I know what that's like. What is one of those brick walls?
One of those brick walls that the person that I was doing the research on was born in 1830. So therefore, I can't seem to find parents or whether he had any siblings or not.
Wow. That is a brick wall. So have you done some research in that geographic area? Sometimes there is an historical association or a church in the area that might have some type of family chart or family tree.
Well, I don't know what church because he was born in South Carolina. And I haven't been able to locate a
You're muted. You're muted.
Hello?
Yes. Okay. Yes. You
Hello?
said, yes. Hi. I hear you now. You said, I have not been able to locate a church. And then I think that's where I lost your audio.
Yeah, okay. I can't, I know I was told that he was born in Plum Branch, South Carolina.
Okay.
Which was back in part of Edgefield, from what I've been told, but I can't get anybody to give me any specific information. And they don't want to talk. So I did come across one lady that gave me an explanation that the family don't want to talk because family married family back then.
I see. So yes, that's a brick wall. Yes. My goodness. But it does sound like an intriguing project. Someone born in 1834 in South Carolina. Where did he live after his birth in Edgefield?
Well, the best of my knowledge, he was always there.
Okay.
And I guess, and then he might have got sick or something because somewhere down the line, somebody said they think he moved with his daughter in Spartanburg, South Carolina.
Okay.
But I don't know who. So I'm just stuck.
Okay. Well, yes, I love when people trace roots like that. And so his daughter, where did she live her life? And is that leading to anything, or is that another brick wall, the daughter's life?
I don't know. That's another brick wall
that's another brick wall. Okay. Yeah. Well, I wish you well with this project because I love to read those types of stories. How long have you been working on the project?
Well, about 5 years.
Okay. Okay. Is there any other question related to part of what we discussed tonight or any other way? Anything else you'd like to add?
No.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm happy to meet you tonight on the video conference. Thank you for participating.
You're welcome.
And so if Jordanen is available to send us off to the evening, or someone from the library, I'd like to just wrap up and say that it is my pleasure to be a part of something like this, a program at the library. The last time I was visiting my family in Georgia, I was at the In the Pines branch of the library. And I worked several days actually in the library because it was such a stimulating location for me. So thank you very much to everybody. So I think that's a sign off. And let's see, there is a message. And no, I don't hear any other voices. I did just read that message in the chat. but I don't hear your voice. I think I hear you now coming in. You just respond. Well, I'm waiting for the library to give us the sign off. Or Jordana, if you'd like for me to sign off, I can do that. Or if you would be able to. We have another question coming in. Please share. When I get the question, I'll read the question so that everybody will know what I'm answering. Okay, so I like that first question. I'll take the first one. What tips were helpful to you during your writing process? The most useful advice I got was to make sure I brought the right professional people or the right professional type into the process. I did talk about the development editor. That was crucial. And that's why I did mention that at the beginning of the conversation tonight. When we sit down to write our stories, some of us will write ourselves as the smartest, the kindest, the superlatives in so many ways that are the positives. And sure, that can be part of the story. But for me, it was so important to know that the fighting spirit that I displayed throughout my life from age 14 forward, the fighting spirit that I displayed came from someplace. And until I had a development editor look at my manuscript, I did not know that there were gaps in my storytelling. So for me, here's the process. Create a list of the emotional episodes and then start writing. And these don't have to be written in order, but create the list of the emotional episodes, write with detail about those episodes, put them in chronological order. Then, this was my process. Then, with a development editor, I listened to her advice about where there were gaps that left the reader questioning, what's the motivation? Why was the reaction this way, positive or negative? What was the recovery? What did I do to rebound when something negative happened? So yes, create your outline, write your story, share with a development editor who can help you add the legitimacy to the character development, because the character of the person, of the protagonist, we know ourselves to some extent, but for someone to read about us, there's something that we don't know that we need to write. Okay, so that is one of the most important tips. And I see a question. Do you have a writing schedule? Fortunately, I could write when I wanted to write. I was teaching journalism, and I could write when I got the emotional charge, the emotional stimulation, when I could go inside and access emotions, that's when I would write. So I did not write on a schedule. I've always been a person who doesn't use schedules. So I'm not that person who writes from 7:30 in the morning until 11:30 in the morning. I take lunch and then I go back to write at 3:30 in the afternoon. I know that it works that way for some people. That wasn't my schedule. And I did start at some point when I was really getting toward the end of the first draft. I would write from 11 p.m. to 2 or 3 in the morning because I would live my day with the people in my life. And at night, when I had my private time, that's when my writing became more interior. And so that worked for me. Absolutely not the writing person in the morning. Okay, and I wonder, will there be any other questions? If you have a question, you may type it, or we might be coming toward the end. Let me see. While I'm looking and waiting for this answer, okay, I do have the answer coming in. I do want to say that during my time in France, I came to France in 2009 for a training and a teaching possibility. And I'm still here exploring how to write and how to train people. And I have found that writing a book is a revolutionary thing to do. Because when we are in charge of our own words, when we can tell our own stories, it is a point of revolution. And so I'd say that take that thought with you and the tips and the conversation we've had tonight. And please go forward and enjoy the writing experience. And I'd love to see your books on the shelves. So thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.